Um, Good evening, everyone. I would like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is Tuesday, December 7th, 2021. The Portland Board of Public Education is meeting in a blended format with some participants at Casco Bay High School and others joining via Zoom. Board Member Burke is going to chair tonight's meeting. I am home quarantining and not able to join the meeting in person. And it's both difficult and awkward to chair the meeting on Zoom while other board members are in person. And as I cannot see the board members or what's happening in the room. So thank you so much, Adam, for chairing tonight. I really appreciate your jumping in earlier today and chairing this meeting. So thank you again, Adam, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. You've made it easy for me. And I'll begin by asking the superintendent to call the roll.
Ms. Bondo?
Présente.
Mr. Burke?
Here.
Ms. Russell-Better?
Here.
Ms. Biliu?
Here.
Mr. Youssef?
Here.
Ms. Aswami?
Here.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Here.
Mr. Alzamili?
Here.
Ms. Santiago?
Here.
And Chair Figdor?
Here.
Missed one, superintendent.
The internet.
You missed
Internet.
Jody.
Yeah. Jody.
Because we don't have Jody on here. My apologies. Ms. Dew?
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would everyone now please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And then now as policy, the chair will share our land acknowledgement. Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand. The Wolastoqey or Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki Confederacy or People of the Dawnland. We are honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we are committed to making the past, present, and future of Wabanaki peoples visible in our schools and classrooms. To begin this evening, look to see if there's any public comment on items not on the agenda. If members are here, there's nobody here in person. I will look if there's an attendee who would like to speak on Zoom. I will call on you and I will tell you the rules as I read them here. You will use your raise your hand feature provided on Zoom, and this feature is found in the webinar control bar at the bottom of the screen, or it can be found by selecting your name on the participant screen. I will call the Zoom name of the public participant with their hand raised to address the board. Members of the public are asked to state their name and address, and will have 3 minutes to comment. If you need more time, you can ask for it. So begin, I see George Rio on Zoom. Do I need to do anything more to allow them to talk?
No, just, I think all you have to do is to, whoever is hosting needs to, yep, he's there. So now you can just tell him to go ahead.
Okay, there you go, George. You have 3 minutes.
All right, thank you so much. George Rowe, I live on Hanover Street in West Bayside. I just wanted to comment on the vacancies that are on the school board and the fact that you'll hopefully have a robust discussion at your workshop later this evening. There were a couple of things that the city council and the city clerk had before them at their meeting last night that I think has introduced a little bit of confusion about your possible paths forward. The city charter gives the city council the authority to shorten the timelines for the nomination phase of the election. And typically, at least for the city council, which they don't have that authority, an election season is typically 127 days plus the actual election day itself. And that involves basically the 56 days of nomination gathering. So the city charter lays out a very specific time frame that you can only start gathering petitions 127 days before the election, and you have to have them in by the earliest is the 85 days before the election, and the latest is, I think, 75 or 72 days before the election. And that's where I get this 56 days. But the city charter gives the city council for school board special elections the right to shrink that 56 days down to a much smaller number. And the big question is, of course, what is a reasonable number? I think that your recommendation to the city council about how to go forward would, hopefully, would get, obviously a lot of respect and deference. But we know that the two at-large seats are both very short terms because they're up for re-election again in November. And so the idea of a very short nomination phase, I would say maybe 30 days or even less, would be quite reasonable. Of course, you got to get the word out as fast as possible to everybody that there will be a much shorter nomination phase. And obviously people need to start thinking pretty much right now if they wanted to maybe throw their hat in the ring. But unfortunately, the city council has kind of wasted a lot of their time. I mean, one of these vacancies was known as of the morning of October 6th, and they're just finally starting to talk about scheduling, an election to fill that vacancy. So my point of all of this is, if you really believe that you want representatives in their chairs doing the hard work that you're all doing as soon as possible, you need to fervently demand that ability for the council to shorten that nomination period be done. And that would enable us to have an election.
Thank you, George.
Possibly.
That's been 3 minutes. Would you like to request further time?
Yeah, I'll just wrap up in the next 10 seconds here. But my point is you could have an election in March if you wanted one. And the only thing that's holding you back is somebody needs to demand it very forthrightly and clearly. So thank you and good luck.
Yes, thank you for speaking to us this evening. Is there anybody else that would like to speak as part of public comment on items not on the agenda? I see no other hands, so I'm going to close the public comment period. I'd like to move now to the board chair remarks. Chair Figdor wrote the board remarks for tonight and asked me to share them with you, which I'll do now. Tonight, we're going to consider a contract extension for Superintendent Botana. It follows the board's form evaluation process, which we completed last month. Our evaluation strongly acknowledged that the 2020 to 2021 school year was one of truly unprecedented challenges as the COVID-19 pandemic upended public education as we knew it. With the pandemic changing and evolving throughout the school year, the superintendent was presented with a series of impossible choices as we strove to keep our staff, students, and their families safe and our students learning, engaged, and with basic needs such as food met. We commended Superintendent Botana for ensuring that our Portland Promise vision and mission define the district's work and decision-making notwithstanding the pandemic, rather than putting it on hold or de-emphasizing it, that he even moved equity to the center of our four goals. While change is not happening quickly enough for our students and staff of color to address and redress inequities in our school district, we acknowledge that changing systems and cultures takes time and that the roots of the inequities are complex and beyond what any school district can achieve alone. We expressed our strong confidence in Superintendent Botana's leadership of the district, concluding that he led with the highest of standards, integrity, rigor, focus, grace, courage, and compassion. Later in the meeting tonight, we will consider and vote on a contract extension for Superintendent Botana. And now to you, Superintendent Superintendent, for your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Pro Tem. This is the first time in 3 years that I do not open my remarks with a land acknowledgement. I'm very proud to see that it's been formally incorporated into the board agenda and read by the chair earlier. Congratulations to Board Chair Figdor on being reelected to the chair this year. I look forward to continuing to work closely with you over the coming term. And I'd also like to welcome all of our new student board reps, as well as new board member Nylat Biliou. I look forward to working with you as you bring your perspective as a relatively recent graduate of our schools, along with your life experiences and expertise to work with the district. Later in the meeting, as you heard, you'll be asked to approve my contract renewal, and I'm proud to have the opportunity to continue to do my work here in this great city and school district. The past 5.5 years have been the pinnacle of my career, and I look forward to continuing that work for the next 2.5 years. I want to be transparent about my intent to not renew my contract beyond this 2-year extension. I will have served this community for 8 years at that point. I'll be 62 years old. I know I don't look a day over 30. My son will be done with college, hopefully, and it will be time to begin a different chapter in my life. I'm incredibly proud of the work that we've done together as an administration, board, staff, and community. Our work to create a more equitable and just school system is well underway, but it's still in its infancy, and it's likely never to be done. Because I'm deeply committed to this work, I believe that consistency and continuity are paramount. My decision to announce my intent to retire from the superintendency at the end of the 23-24 school year is intended to give the board an opportunity to work proactively to identify leadership that will further our Portland Promise commitments. I'm looking forward to working with you in the succession planning. But that's well down the road. We have a tremendous amount of work to do, and that work is what I want to talk about today. Specifically, in the context of my evaluation, I'd like to continue to make visible to everyone my priorities, my team's priorities for this year. These priorities will be familiar to the board as I shared them as part of the evaluation process, and they are familiar to our staff and to any of the readers of my monthly forecaster column, which has discussed each of these priorities over the past 3 months, with the final priority being the subject of the upcoming December column. The board packet has the public-facing version of these priorities. We call it that, the public-facing one, because internally we have more detailed and technical plans that include schedules, benchmarks, and responsibility charts. I want to point out that these priorities are not new. They represent the current focus of our ongoing work to achieve our Portland Promise equity achievement, whole student, and people goals. Specifically, the first priority is to strengthen our core instruction. We've known that key to our success is ensuring that all of our students have access to high quality curriculum, instructional materials, and learning opportunities. The work that we've been doing to implement and scale up illustrative math, our phonics curriculum for the past several years, are examples of the ongoing nature of this work. Our development and implementation of Wabanaki and local Black history and STEM units are newer efforts that are nested in this priority. An example of how this priority aims at ensuring equitable access to the curriculum is the work being done to support English language learners in core instructional settings rather than in pullouts, which was a major budget priority last year and is now being brought to life in our classrooms. Our second priority is directly aligned to our whole student and equity promise, Portland Promise goals. Specifically, this priority focuses on building structures and dispositions that make us safer and more equitable and foster connections and a sense of belonging for our students. Operationalizing the notion of a Portland Promise point person for every student, building our understanding of trauma-informed practices, de-escalation, and restorative practices are embedded in this priority. This also calls on us to elevate and center the perspective of those whose voices are more often than not left out of the conversation. A good example of this was our listening session with Latinx parents and students this past weekend, as we strive to understand and address the concerns and challenges that militate against their success in our schools. The third priority is directly connected to something that the board members that have been with us for a while have heard us talk about frequently, and that is to create increased collective efficacy among our Portland Public Schools people. This priority includes pivotal work that we're doing to become better able to access and use our data and improve our ability to communicate with each other. The fourth priority is designed to elevate and position the work of everyone in the system towards the three other priorities. So it's really about enabling our teaching and learning staff to focus on that work by minimizing the distractions that keep them from doing that. Creating safe, clean, and well-functioning learning environments, effective and responsive support systems are a part of this priority. You will also see that we had included creating a new student schedule for next year, consistent with the board's stated intent to create a school schedule that is more aligned with adolescent biorhythms. As you know, we tabled doing so for this year, and that's an important point that I want to make. We developed these priorities prior to the start of this school year at a time when we thought we would have a different pandemic context than what we actually have. So this is that example. The student schedule is not the only place where we've had to course correct on our priorities and scale back what we will be able to accomplish this year. So I'm going to pause here to see if you have any questions or comments before I move on with my report.
To the board, are there any questions or comments for the superintendent? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Chair Pretend. So, Superintendent, thank you for that presentation, the core instruction. And I think my comment is about, because I've been all the time looking for the whys on achievement gap. And then when I look at the way students are spending all of them in the classroom, like 95% of time, they're spending in the classroom, but we still have a high achievement. We still have a lot of failure, some of our students. So I mean, now I think it's time to look at what's going on in the classroom. So I think what we're building as a strategy is a step, is a really a step stone for how the teaching strategies is really happening for each student. So I really appreciate the step and we're moving forward. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I think we're back to you, Superintendent.
Great. So in closing this section of my remarks, I would like to recognize and extend a belated thank you to a couple of great community partners. Longfellow Books has partnered with PPS throughout the pandemic to get books to students. In March of 2020, when PPS was forced to pivot to remote learning, the staff at Longfellow Books were instrumental in mailing 2,400 books to over 300 elementary school students who were struggling to access their education. They helped raise funds, source titles at cost, troubleshoot logistics, and donated their time for all of the shipping and handling. The United Way donated $3,000 to this effort, and their volunteers assisted Longfellow Books with the shipping and handling. This is one more example of how the United Way helps to hold our community together. Since then, they have both helped with 2 summer reading programs, mailing thousands of books to hundreds of students across the city, and we're so grateful to be partnering with such fantastic local resources. I would now like to begin our school reopening update. As we've been doing for the past year, we provide a comprehensive update on our school reopening plans at board meetings. Today, we're going to update you on our case counts, provide a vaccination and winter athletics update, and reprise our transportation challenges. We've had 55 cases in the past 2 weeks. This represents the highest number of cases since the start of the school year. At this point, we're well ahead of the pace from last year. Of course, last year, we did not begin to see a heavy caseload until the late fall and winter. Last year, we also didn't have testing in place to help us identify asymptomatic cases. And of course, we also did not have vaccines and some of the other mitigation measures that exist today. It's important to remember that the high prevalence of cases continues to be largely the result of community spread. Maine continues to see higher incidence of cases than at any time during the pandemic. We see few cases where spread may have been the result of classroom and school interactions. And it's also important to note that from those 55 cases that we had in the last 2 weeks, we had fewer than 90 close contacts. So in essence, less than 2 close contacts for each case. That is, again, a testament to the mitigation measures, including masking, social distancing, and testing that are in place. I would like to transition to vaccines. Prior to Thanksgiving, we held the first vaccine clinics in all of our elementary and middle schools, except for Talbot, which is scheduled for this week. The second round of vaccines is scheduled for the coming 2 weeks so that every student who's been approved to be vaccinated will be fully so by the time we return from the winter break. Again, with the exception of Talbot, where the second vaccine clinic will happen immediately after the break. We were able to vaccinate approximately 1,000 students through this effort. So that's fully 25 to 30% of our students age 5 to 11. And of course, as many of you know, many other students are vaccinated as a result of their parents' efforts to obtain vaccines through other sources in the community. We have been advised by legal counsel that the national employer vaccine mandate is held up in the courts and that a resolution is not imminent. Your packet was supposed to include the most recent staff vaccination report. I will have it in there shortly. I never got around to uploading it. As reported a couple of meetings ago, 94% of our staff are vaccinated. I understand that we would have the capacity to require anyone who is not vaccinated to participate in our weekly pool testing program after the winter. We have the capacity after the winter break to have all of our staff who are not vaccinated participate in our weekly pool testing program. So this would have been our fallback if the vaccine testing mandate would have been implemented, because that required either vaccination or weekly testing. And so de facto, our ability to do that will provide the same measure of mitigation as if we had actually been able to implement the national employer vaccine mandate. So I want to make sure that you understand that we will initiate conversations with our collective bargaining representatives, as that's the appropriate next step, and I will keep you informed. Next, I would like to discuss our winter sports season requirements. We're happy to be able to provide a full complement of co-curricular programming this winter. That's a big departure from where we were. This has been broadly publicized. We will be welcoming spectators at most of our events. Because of size limitations, we will not have spectators at King Middle School home games, and all spectators will be required to be masked at our venues. Games at the Expo will also include the Expo's requirements of vaccinations or recent testing. In general, sort of as a rule of thumb, we will be operating at 50% of venues' capacities, and no concessions will be operating. Participants will need to be masked as well, even when competing. They will either need to be vaccinated or participate in our pool testing program. And we expect to have the pool testing program available shortly after we return from the winter break. While these guidelines are largely the same for most of our competitors, this is something that superintendents across the region and ADs across the region spent a lot of time on this fall. We will not play in venues or against teams that do not follow the masking guideline. These requirements will be in force until further notice. Finally, I want to update you on our transportation situation. In spite of the approval of our MOU with the base union to provide a hiring bonus to bus drivers, we've not been able to hire anyone at this point. Thus, our transportation administration is driving daily, and there And if there are any calls in, so people are absent from work, it forces us to cancel a route. As we foreshadowed earlier in the fall, we've had to cancel a significant number of routes in the last couple of weeks. We are very fortunate that we've not had to cancel any bus routes today or yesterday. So I'm going to knock on wood. I'm grateful that our community has been able to largely meet the transportation needs through a variety of means. I'm also so grateful, so very grateful to all of our staff who have found ways to support our cancellations by organizing walking school buses, driving students, and otherwise modeling what we mean when we say that it takes a village. Our team, led by Executive Director of Community Partnerships, Grace Valenzuela, is now activated recruiting volunteers, exploring contractual relationships, and attempting to procure smaller vehicles that don't require a CDL to drive. While it's likely that we will continue to need to cancel buses, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to identify more predictable and sustainable fallback methods of getting our students to school. As we head into the holiday season, I hope that in addition to enjoying time with loved ones and friends, that everyone will continue to guard against infection and transmission of COVID. I urge everyone to follow health and safety guidelines, especially administering the symptoms checks before coming to work or school. We have been successful at keeping school open full-time through the fall by taking care of ourselves and each other. So let's continue that positive trend as we come back and head into the winter holidays. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Superintendent. Again, any questions or comments from the board for the superintendent? Member Bondo, yes, please.
Thank you, Superintendent. I have two questions on the pool testing on the middle school. How are we doing? And also, are we expecting to have some the pool testing for high school as well?
The question is pool testing at the middle school.
Yes.
So it's fully operational in grade 7 and 8. We had it in grade 6 from the beginning of the school year. So we've added 7 and 8. Right now, we're working to get ourselves to be able to do high school with the athletes, and that will be done at the schools. And, you know, we can look at expanding beyond that down the road. But, you know, our priority right now is getting it up and running for high school athletics and co-curricular activities. And then for staff as part of our alternative to vaccination.
Oh, okay. So with the shortage of the testing, how long we have to wait to get the result? Because now we have the elementary school and middle school, so that means it's a high number. Then we are testing now. With the shortage of testing, is a backlog of the result coming back. So about us,
it's still about 24 hours.
Still at 24 hours.
24 hours, sometimes 48. Yeah.
Okay, good. So my second question is about the sport. So if I heard you well, is that the players on the field, they have to wear masks when they play?
That's correct.
So I just want to understand, the policy is coming from us, or is just a requirement from the state?
No, that's our policy. That is, and it's not a policy, that is our implementation, practice. So that is something that most districts in our region agreed to that.
Okay.
The state was very hands-off about it, and they had recommendations from CDC and from the Maine Principals Association that included that. But if we, if we had decided to go in a different direction, we could have gone in a different direction. We believe that is what makes sense still, given the high prevalence, to continue to have, as much mitigation as we possibly can.
So do we have a space for review in couple of weeks, or maybe early next year?
We'll continue. I mean, as I said in my comments, that is in force, until further notice. So we will continue to look at that. I think, some of the districts in the region are, wanting to continue to evaluate that, and we will continue to look at it as well. But at this time, we believe that makes the most sense as a way to prevent the spread.
Yeah,
of
because
COVID.
I'm still a little concerned about a player playing basketball on the field and on the basketball court and going back and forth and breathing and have those energy when they wear a mask. So,
we did it last year. We didn't find any, major problems with it. We have some student athletes here. I don't know if they would like to weigh in on that.
Yeah,
you should,
I would like
by all means, be honest about it.
I would like to hear from you.
I run track for Deering, and with the masks on, I feel like it really impacts our times, and it can get pretty difficult to breathe because especially when we're doing practices in the Deering hallway, because that's where we do it. We do sets of like repeat 200s, for example. And my freshman year, when COVID was still very new and we weren't fully prepared here, we did without the masks. And I remember it was fairly easy. It wasn't difficult. And now when I do it, it's extremely exhausting. And I feel like the lack of air that you can take in with the masks is really impactful. But I understand why we do it. I just think that it really is impactful on how we perform.
Okay. Are you playing basketball too? Are you playing any sport?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment specifically on the masks that the school provides. I do wrestling and it's already a tiny room, so there's not a lot of air, and those masks are very hard to breathe out of. So I find, it is impossible. When you're worked up and your heart rate is up, you can't breathe at all.
You play basketball? You play sport?
Yes. I had a game this afternoon, actually. I would like to agree with saying that running up and down the court for 32 minutes is very difficult with a mask on, especially when you're not allowed to have a break in the middle of a game. I understand why we do it, and I agree we do get these really heavy cloth masks handed out to kids who don't have access to them, and I think that should definitely be changed. Sometimes there are plastic ones, but the cloth ones get all sweaty and gross, and it's just really unfair.
Yeah, and we have placed an order for the surgical type masks for people. So I think that you've heard it, that it is definitely hard, but it's also hard for me to be wearing this mask and trying to speak right now.
Yeah.
So and I think it's one of the challenges of the pandemic and something that we've had to adjust to. So we will continue to look at it, and if we were ever in a situation where the spread of COVID were at a point where we weren't concerned about, the masks, but for the time being, we're more concerned about COVID than we are about the overexertion.
So are we providing masks? So can we provide a better quality of
I
mask?
just said that we placed the order for those.
Yeah. I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you so much.
Surgical mask.
Oh yeah. Okay, thank you.
Please go ahead.
I wanted to ask if you guys have a protocol for any instance where if one team were to have multiple cases, and what would happen? Would they have to forfeit? What is the procedure for that?
Yeah, if they did not have enough players to field the team, they would forfeit.
Okay.
Or we would forfeit if we were in that situation.
Sorry. No. And I'm wondering if we could get a report of the type of masks you guys are looking at, or maybe if we can work on finding more athletically accessible masks.
Mr. Townsend, are you still back there somewhere? Can you just tell people what kind of masks we have ordered?
I just will repeat. The feedback that, has come up here, we have, made a replacement order around kind of more typical disposable surgical masks based on feedback from students. So we haven't looked specifically into athletic ones for participants, but I can engage with the athletic directors to see if there's a viable option for us there.
Okay, thank you.
But those would be masks like the one that you're wearing?
Correct. Yeah. So to replace the cloth masks, we've definitely gotten the feedback that students don't, don't wear them well, right? To encourage masking by all students, not just for athletes, but just in general at our schools to make those available.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Burke. And thank you. I appreciate the student rep sharing their experiences. That was helpful to just understand what it's like. I had wondered about playing competitive sports with masks. So, Superintendent, thank you for sharing about how things are going. And I just wanted to comment that the 55 cases with only less than 90 close contacts, I'm just really pleased with how mitigation strategies are going. Having two students myself, one at elementary and one middle school, just seeing how that's happening and playing out, that students are able to continue to be in school, I think is really remarkable. So just want to thank staff for all of the hard work they're doing, all the buildings, to make sure we're following all the protocols. I just had a couple questions. One was about, I know, Superintendent, you mentioned the 1,000 students have been vaxxed. I think it was the 5 to 11, right? Was that what that was? And I'm just wondering, overall, are we able to track student vaccination numbers throughout, like from elementary through high school? Is there a mechanism of that happening right now?
No, we don't. As you know, the state does provide reports for the 12 to 16 group. And that's derived from, from sort of health department data.
And it's like zip code or something, is that?
Yeah,
okay.
Right. And so that is not our, that's not our accounting for that. We have not, people don't have to tell us whether they're vaccinated.
Right. Okay. I'm just wondering if, just would that change? I'm just wondering, getting that information at some point, do you see that as being useful for us to voluntarily ask families that, or how would that?
I think we would wind up in the same place as we wind up with the data that we get from the state. We would have an approximation that would not be reliable for decision making. So I think that it illustrates, like in general, we know that Cumberland County is highly vaccinated and our zip codes are highly vaccinated. So the data that we have for the 12 to 16 year old is in the neighborhood of, 90% of our students that are vaccinated. But, if we were to ask people to respond to a survey, we would probably wind up with 20 to 30 to 40% of people responding. And, it would likely be somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% saying that they were vaccinated.
Well,
even higher, because people who would respond to that voluntary survey would be more likely to be vaccinated people.
Right. I think I was curious about, happy to hear that 25 to 30% of our elementary age kids got vaccinated at school, but we know many families will have vaccinated outside of school. But I think I just was wondering about that population, if we are going to have a lower percentage than the 12 and up, just because of it being a newer approval for that age. But I also hear what you're saying, that perhaps having that information doesn't change our protocols.
And I would assume that CDC will at some point, down the road, obviously it's very new, also be able to provide the same type of reporting that they provide for the 12 to 16 year old, a 12 to 18 year old group, because they will have, they'll have public health records on that, and they'll be able to do it in the same way by zip code and so on.
Okay, thank you. And my other couple questions, one was just when you mentioned about the option of pool testing for staff who are not vaccinated. And when you said that, I just was trying to remember, is pool testing now offered to all staff to be part of? Okay, do we have a sense of how much that's being used as a?
It's being widely used, but what I'm saying is requiring anybody who's not vaccinated to participate in pool.
I just was curious whether using it as another strategy if many staff were doing that already.
Many staff currently avail themselves of it, just because they want to know.
Right. Okay.
But, this would be requiring it after we have discussions with our collective bargaining unit.
Yeah. Okay. Do you know does it seem that staff being part of that? I'm not sure how you measure that, but do you think that's been helpful in identifying for staff being able to stay well because of the, that does seem to be useful. Okay. Great. And the last question I just had was about the transportation piece. I was wondering, and again, just really appreciate all the steps being taken to inform families when we have to cancel a bus and, rallying all of our resources to try to get options for kids to get to school. But I'm wondering if in the, I don't know how many times this has happened, Superintendent, but like in the period of time we've had to make cancellations, have we been able to see the impact on the attendance, like directly? Do we have numbers about what that's looking like?
We don't have a detailed report, but we have incorporated into our protocols asking principals to look at the list from the buses that were canceled and to let us know how many students were not there. And
I know
in
that's
general,
new.
we've found it to be consistent with attendance for the school overall. So, in other words, we've been able to, that's why I'm super grateful to our community for having figured out how to get students to school in those circumstances, because we've seen across the board, that's built into our protocols, that it's a handful of kids that don't come when we've had to cancel those routes.
Okay. That's great to hear. Thank you.
I'm going to move to Chair Figdor on Zoom and then to Member Youssef. Chair Figdor.
Thank you so much, Board Member Burke. I had a follow-up question about the mandatory pool testing for unvaccinated staff. And Mr. Superintendent, I think you might have mentioned this, but it was quick. And so I just wanted to clarify again. I know that you're saying the next step is to talk with the collective bargaining units. And is the goal to have those conversations this month and the mandatory pool testing requirement in place at the beginning of the next year? Or what's the time? My question is about the timeline for.
That's roughly the timeline. We don't have like a tight date. We obviously have to have those conversations, and those could prolong themselves, although I'm not super concerned about it, because I think that all of our associations have expressed a commitment. And again, I just want to emphasize 94% of our staff are vaccinated. So we're talking about the margins here, and some of those could be people that have had COVID, people that are immune compromised and things along those lines. So there may be multiple reasons why people are not vaccinated. So I'm not super concerned about it. And then our first priority is to get the testing set up for our student athletes. And then our next priority would be moving to have that in place with our staff and for the most part, we'll be able to do that with in all of our schools. We currently have the capacity already in place. At the high schools, we'll have that capacity as we scale it up for the co-curricular participants. And then that just leaves things like, the transportation department, the food service department, central office, and things along those lines where we need to establish a new protocol and a new, sort of collection site and so on. So we're really talking, marginal additional work that needs to be done.
That makes a lot of sense. The prioritization, prioritizing the student athletes first, absolutely. And, just to say from the board's perspective, we are fully aware of, that such a high percentage of staff is highly vaccinated, which is why we chose not to move forward with our own vaccine mandate back in the fall. So I'm so grateful to all of the staff for being so with acting very quickly to be vaccinated and protecting themselves, but also the school communities. So, but this kind of final step to capture the small number of unvaccinated staff is really good news to me, because we essentially have achieved a vaccine mandate or the impacts of it through this other means. So it's really great news, and thank you for all of the work that you're doing and that the staff is doing to make it possible.
Thank you. I have Member Youssef, and then Representative Dayu. Would you like to speak after that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Adam Park. So the current staff vaccination is 94%. Are we using the same survey that we did before, or how are we keep tracking the change?
Yeah, so that is not like what I just discussed about the student data, which is by zip code. This is actually our frontline supervisors have seen the vaccination card for staff that report to them, and we're responsible for reporting that, aggregated the way the state asks for it, on a monthly basis. And so that is actual current employees and the percentage of them that we've verified that they have been vaccinated.
My other question is the incentives remain the same, or we are thinking to?
No, at this point, the incentives remain. Just for people that may not know this, we've had a $100 incentive for anybody who demonstrated that they were vaccinated. So that's still in place.
One last question: the 55 cases that you talked about, few of them are in classrooms. That means students come in with the virus from outside, either their home or...
Yeah, I think that's our understanding. We do track when there's multiple cases within a pool or within a classroom to understand, whether students may have been infected in school. And we're never 100% sure one way or the other. But in general, we can, we don't see like somebody that has COVID that then there's another 3 people in their class that also get COVID. So it's usually isolated cases or small numbers of cases. And in many of those, there's often a relationship outside of school. So it's siblings or, close friends that, hang out after school and things along those lines.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Rep. Dayu?
Hi. So my question is, you have 94% vaccinated. What about booster shots?
We have not begun to track booster shots. We've not been required to do that to date.
And this might not matter with the kids, but of the 55, have any of them already been vaccinated and became positive, or?
I don't know that.
You don't? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that.
Thank you.
Member Bondo?
Nyla also has her hand up.
Oh, are you pointing me to Nyla or to yourself?
She should raise her hands too.
Okay. Member Bilu first, and then Member Bondo? Okay.
Okay, I just have some follow-up to the transportation questions that Aura had asked. Aura had asked if we have any idea what the impact has been. Were you stating that we haven't had any loss, meaning we've been able to cover every time there was somebody that there was a driver that was out sick? Could you clarify that if that's possible?
Yeah. So when we have to cancel a route, it's because all of our substitutes are being used, and our administrative staff, so our director, our assistant director, our
Pretty much
dispatcher,
anybody.
everybody. There's
Yeah.
nobody left at the bus garage. So, like when the phone rings, there's nobody there to pick it up.
Okay.
But we've had instances where, all of our capacity is used. And so all of last week, every day, we canceled at least one bus.
Okay.
When that happens, we communicate, and we have a rotation so that it's not the same family that gets impacted over and over again.
Mhm.
We have a rotation, and, we communicate with families that, bus 94 is not going to run today, and please activate your alternative transportation arrangement. So we communicated proactively in advance at the beginning of when we knew this was going to happen, but before it happened,
Mhm.
to ask people to develop alternative transportation plans, which could be like parents dropping the kids off or neighbors carpooling and things along those lines. And so in some cases, schools have also established a walking school bus. So, for example, last week we had numerous times where both Reiki and East End were impacted, and staff from those schools had organized in advance and met students at the bus stop and walked them to school. So those are the kinds of things. We have a group of volunteers that also, we have, spreadsheets where every stop has somebody assigned, and somebody drives to those stops at the time that the bus is supposed to be there,
Mhm.
and picks up anybody who didn't get the message, who got the message but didn't have an alternative. So
Okay.
that's how we've done it. And then at the end of the day, we ask the principals that were affected, which is usually 3 schools because our buses run 3 different routes on any given day.
Mhm.
We ask them to report for bus 94, how many kids did not make it to school from bus 94?
Mhm.
And that was my answer to
Laura.
Ms. Russell Better, was what we've seen is that maybe out of 90 kids, there's 5 that don't come. And that's close to what our average attendance is. So that's why I'm saying that we have not seen, it's not like out of those 95, 25 don't come to school. It's a handful that's consistent with what our general attendance data looks like.
Okay. So with that being said, there's different processes for whenever, or different processes, different opportunities for people to still, if it doesn't happen, for them to still get picked up. So my other question is, have we tried to create any opportunity to partner with transportation organizations to alleviate some of that pressure from staff or from teachers?
Yeah, and we're doing that. We are looking for partners. For example, we were able to contract an additional charter route earlier in the process, and that's helped to alleviate some of the capacity concerns. Just today, and I don't know, Dr. Valenzuela, if I'm allowed to say anything about today's partnership. Yeah, so the Boys and Girls Club has agreed to let us use their van to drive students to school on the days that we have to cancel a route. So, and we're looking at other partnerships like that to be able to have other vehicles that will allow us to get students to work. So we're looking at all those partnerships. The board approved policy at the last meeting to allow us to have volunteers drive our students. So those are all of the steps that we've been taking in preparation for where we are now, which is having to cancel bus routes on a fairly regular basis.
Okay, thank you. And I would love any opportunity to help figure that out or do some research on the behalf of the school board.
Great, thank you.
Member Bondo?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I have a question on the on the vaccination rate. I know we're getting our student vaccination rate from the state, right? The report. So this is also included adult education or not?
They do not report the vaccination rate for students at adult ed.
Okay, so do we have any roughly idea on so what's happening in the adult education? They just
We
the
have
requirement on the mask?
we have vaccination data for staff at adult ed. We don't have student vaccination. And they have the same mitigation strategies that we have in place. They also have and Ms. Dio can speak to this, a more robust remote presence than we do at our other schools, just because it works out better for people. That was one of the things that they've learned, as a result of the pandemic and so on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Any other comments or questions? Student representatives, any comments or questions on items the superintendent brought forward in his report? No? Okay. Well, please.
I just wanted to say that most of the classes at Portland Adult Education are remote, but the ones that are not, definitely not, are the English as a second language classes. And I am very interested in knowing what the vaccination rate, so I will definitely look into that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're ready to move to the report of the secretary. This is the consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of November 16th, 2021. I'm looking for a motion.
So moved.
Member Rissa Better, is there a second? Member Youssef, is there any questions on this motion from the board? Seeing none. Is there any public comment on the motion? Approval of our meeting minutes from our last business meeting on November 16th. Remember, if you're on Zoom, please use the raise hand feature. I'm seeing none. And is there any board discussion on the matter?
Not board discussion, but I just want to point out, I think, for all of our new members, since you weren't here at the time of the meeting, that it is appropriate for you to abstain at this time, since you were not here to actually be able to attest to those meetings. Now, if you were here and you read the minutes or watched the video and you want to vote, feel free to do that, but don't feel obligated to vote on something that you that you weren't here for and were not a part of.
Thank you, Superintendent. I'm not seeing any discussion, so by roll call vote, please indicate whether you're in favor of approving the meeting minutes from November 16th, 2021. And for new members, you would either say yes, no, or abstain. Mr. Superintendent, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better?
Yes.
Ms. Biliu?
Abstain.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Ms. Aswami?
Abstain.
Mr. McLaughlin? McLaughlin, sorry. I will get it right at some point. Mr. Alzamili?
To leave early.
Okay. Ms. Santiago?
Abstain.
Ms. Diu?
Abstain.
And Chair Figdor?
Yes.
And so that passes unanimously with a number abstaining. Moving on to consent items. Superintendent, will you please speak to this item?
Yes. So under board policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district of durable goods, goods of significant value and of symbolic importance. As required by the policy, all of the donations are listed in the board memo by name and the donation accompanying this item. Our practice is that each donor receives a written contribution acknowledgement expressing our heartfelt gratitude and for their tax purposes. So I would like to thank the Many contributors to the Portland Public Schools that have made donations of durable goods, substantial value, and historical or commemorative significance. We're very grateful for the support of our work. And we have for Portland High School, they received a donation for social workers to assist students in need from the Portland Female Charitable Society of Portland. Portland High School also received Hannaford gift cards to purchase food for students from April and Dennis Noonan of Portland, and Ocean Avenue Elementary School received a donation toward their activity account from Pamela Emery of Old Orchard Beach. And we want to thank them for their generous support of our work.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody for their support. Now for our board focus on educational issues tonight is on enrollment. I hand it back to you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Tonight's focus on educational issues is a look at our current enrollment. Last year, like districts across the state and country, we saw a significant drop in our enrollment. Given the pandemic context, we knew that a significant number of families might be opting out from formal schooling for the school year. We assumed that with a return to in-person instruction, we would see those numbers normalize. To our, I would say, modest surprise, that did not happen. The enrollment loss that we saw during the 2020-2021 school year continued into this year. So today's presentation attempts to explain where the decrease is coming from. I think it will be informative and possibly dispel some misconceptions or assumptions that we may be making about our enrollment drop. I know that it did that for me. As you know, enrollment plays a pivotal role in our state funding. So we'll talk about the implications of this enrollment drop to the best of our ability. So for this, Executive Director of Data and Technology, Gavin Goodall, will lead the presentation. So Gavin.
All right, thanks. Good evening, board members. Right, just queuing up the presentation. Thanks. So as Superintendent Batana said, the purpose of the presentation show how PPS enrollment has changed over the past few years. We'll look at overall enrollment changes, some of the reasons it's changed, and the demographic shifts that have resulted from those changes. Next slide. So PPS's enrollment peaked in 2010 at 7,112 students and has been slowly declining until 2021, when we saw the steepest drop in enrollment over the last 20 years. There were 253 fewer students in the district in 2021 than in 2020, for a 3.7% decline. And this year we saw a much more modest decline of 37 students at 0.57%. So there's a lot going on in this slide, but this is just showing the enrollment at each grade level over the past couple of years. Please note that that last column is the difference between 2020 and 2022. So just to capture the overall decline since 2020. The part that's highlighted shows that, sorry, well, let me start by saying the overall trend is that the enrollment decline is concentrated in elementary school and kindergarten. We'll look more into a subsequent slide, but another area of concern is that our 12th grade class is a lot larger than our incoming kinder class, and that's where you see the highlighted rows there, and our 11th grade class as well. Next. And here, for you to spend more time with at some point, is just the enrollment changes by school. So as you can see there, some schools are more impacted than others. 5 of our schools actually have slightly increased enrollment, but the rest show slight decreases or higher decreases in some places in a few of our schools. Next one. So in this slide, you can see our current 12th grade class is a lot larger than 11th grade class and kinder classes. A lot of that is explained by super seniors. These are students who are enrolled in 12th grade for more than a year. So in this year, we have 37 of those students who are seniors this year that were also seniors last year. Or I see that concern look I raised. I can't tell you why that is or what we attribute those numbers to. Mr. Townsend might be able to better do that, but these are the numbers. And so that mostly explains the difference between our 11th grade class and our 12th grade class. But as you see on the previous slide by grade level, that we do have low enrollment in our earlier grades. All right. So the next couple of slides show changes in enrollment based on where students are coming to the district from and where they're leaving to go to. This slide compares students coming to the district from charter schools, private schools, and those who are homeschooled, with students who are leaving the district to go to charter schools, private schools, or to be homeschooled. As you can see, the number of students coming to us from private schools has decreased from 2019 to 2021, but we have a fairly large increase this year, while the number of students leaving us to go to private school has increased each year since 2019. However, this does not account for the nearly 250 students we lost across the district from 2020 to 2021. As the superintendent alluded to earlier, we often hear reasons for the decline in enrollment attributed to students leaving the district to private school or to be homeschooled. And while we did have a net negative of 36 students last year leaving us to go to charter, private, or homeschooled, we're up again 46 students this year. This slide shows a different explanation for a decrease in enrollment, the number of students coming to us from other districts, states, and countries relative to the number of students leaving us to go to other districts, states, and countries. So from 2020 to 2021, we had a net positive of 90 students coming to us, but that was down from 339 the previous year, a difference of 249 students. So I'll just pause here to let you guys digest that a bit. Slide 9 here goes back a few more years, starting in 2018, and shows the racial makeup of our student population. You can see there's a consistent decline in the number of white students in the district. Enrollment was slightly increasing from 2018 to 2020, which was fueled by an increase in students of color as the number of white students in the district declined. Since 2020, our white population is still declining, but so is our Black student population as well. However, we are seeing slight increases in our Hispanic and Asian populations over the last couple of years. So this slide shows FRL over the past 3 years. Since 2020, we've gone from a district with over 50% of students qualifying for free and reduced lunch to now just over 44%. As we've mentioned before in board meetings, this may be because fewer families are applying for it rather than the economic need has diminished. The next slide. This is the last of our slides showing demographic changes. This shows that our EL population over time is actually increasing even as our overall enrollment decreases. And so as a district, we have a greater percentage of students of color and English language students as our population has declined over the last couple of years.
And so we wanted to talk a little bit about the implications. I think particularly since we've been, reflecting on this throughout the year as we talked about the drop in free and reduced lunch students. So, we don't have EPS projections at this point, but I think as a rule of thumb to just think about roughly $3,000 less per student as a result of this loss. So that is almost $1 million less in state funding with, than what we had prior to that. At this point, the state has they've not, finalized it, but it's likely that there won't be some of the adjustments that they made for enrollment drops that were present last year in the EPS funding. So I think that just as a rule of thumb, I think we should think about the potential for significant loss of funding in EPS as a result of that. And sort of the flip side of that, and I know that you hear this often during budget discussions, is that, your enrollment is smaller, so therefore that means you need fewer staff. And I think it's important to understand that, while the decrease may be substantial, it's distributed throughout the district in such a way that, it's unlikely to result in very significant decreases in staffing. So, for example, if you just assume an even distribution of fourth grade loss, there are 3 schools that may lose a section as a result of that. And that's just assuming that there's even distribution, which we know that there isn't. But, given the way that we structure our staffing, it's unlikely that that's going to result in a very significant decrease in staffing. And, we are working to develop a student-driven staffing formula at the middle school and the high school, which we currently don't have. But that will be one of the ways that we hope to be able to mitigate for some of this by, at least being able to apply some of those same, methodology that we use for elementary schools at the high school level. So that's our presentation on enrollment for today. And we really wanted to just, help you to understand. I know that along the way earlier this year, some questions, you had raised some questions about, how many students are leaving us to go to homeschool and things along those lines. And so we thought that this would be helpful to illustrate that. So.
Thank you both. Sorry, I was intaking all that information and negating my role as chair, Tim, for the evening. Any questions or comments on this presentation? Yes, up to you.
Hi, I was just wondering what the Portland Adult Education School Academy, if those were in the numbers at all, and what about the GED learners?
No, we do not. This is the pre-K through 12 enrollment. It's a different funding mechanism for that. We know how many students are in Portland Adult Ed, but when we think of the district for state purposes, we think of the pre-K through 12. And so that's usually what we're reporting here. There's, roughly 4,000 students who are associated with Portland Adult Ed over the course of the year, not 4,000 unique students, but, 4,000 students who take different classes at different points.
And I was just curious, what about the homeless K through 12?
Those are included in.
Is there increase, decrease, like?
It's actually, Dr. Valenzuela, do you remember off the top of your head the number of homeless students? It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 200, and it's pretty steady from what it's been in previous years. But that's a separate issue altogether. But, there are more homeless in the region. They're just being placed at, in surrounding communities. So, I don't think that our numbers, reflect the, the true challenge that homelessness is in our community. Just that, lots of our homeless are not being sheltered in Portland anymore. They're being sheltered in hotels in South Portland and Westbrook and Scarborough and so on.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to go to Chair Figdor on Zoom.
Thank you, Board Member Burke. I have 2 questions. The first is just looking at the home language changes in the last 3 years and seeing the increase in the number of students whose home language is either Spanish or Portuguese. And I'm wondering if we've been able to address that from a staffing standpoint, in terms of meeting those kids' needs.
Dr. Valenzuela.
Good evening. The exact number of homeless students is 209. And the question about Spanish and Portuguese.
Staffing.
That is the the group, those are the two groups that are increasing in enrollment. That's true. And in terms of staffing for us at the multilingual center, in terms of accommodating the languages for communication with families, it is, we have increased an additional 0.5 for our Spanish family and engagement community specialist. So that's additional staffing that we have.
And a couple of years ago, we added a second Portuguese.
And a couple of years ago, we have an additional full-time Portuguese speaker in our team.
And is that meeting the need?
For right now, it is working, and it is working for us, yes. For right now.
Thank you. My second question is with respect to the staff-driven, the student-driven staffing formulas, and I'm wondering if how those are being developed, and if the high school and middle school formulas are being worked at the same time, or if we're prioritizing the high school formula where it seems like the need is it may be more urgent.
Assistant Superintendent Townsend can answer that.
Thank you for the question. Good evening, everybody. Yes, so I would agree that we are prioritizing the high school one. It's more complex, and we are working a little bit from scratch on that front, though there are models out there, that we'll use to help kind of develop that. But the middle school one is more about codifying kind of our practice that it's been around the middle school teaming. So there is not as much, at least on the core content area staffing work to be done, because we have kind of a de facto model in place in terms of, the establishment of 4-person core content teams, 2 teams per grade level, and so forth. So it's more there just codifying what those practices have been to make that explicit.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Other questions from the board? Member Bondo?
Thank you for the presentation. I have a quick question here. This is the overall question. We know then families are moving to different areas. So do we have, beside on the COVID, beside the pandemic, do we have a other reason why they're leaving the district? Is something else beside, or just they have decided to leave or to go to the private school or charter?
But again, I think that this is why we wanted to present the data, so that you see that they're not leaving to go to private schools, right?
Yeah.
We're netting a positive intake from private schools.
Yeah.
I think the big takeaway from this is that we have received significantly fewer students from other countries compared to what we had in the past. Those numbers, the decrease from 2020 to present, almost by itself explains the drop. Now there's other places where things go up and other places where things go down.
Yeah.
But the big takeaway for me in looking at this data was, wow, that is very notable, the fact that we receive fewer students from out of country. And I think that goes to, in some ways, goes to the question that Ms. View asked about homeless students.
Right.
Traditionally, many of those students would come into the city, would be placed in, in shelters in Portland, and those students are not coming into Portland. Instead, they're going to South Portland, they're going to Westbrook and Scarborough and things along those lines.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Member Beal?
I just wanted to follow up on that and see if you guys are also checking for poverty correlations where people are moving out of the city because of housing or because of the housing crisis. Like if they're having to move all the way to Wyndham because that's what they can afford, even though Wyndham might not have an ELL program or might not have a program that can best suit their students, they're having to choose that that option because it's what is affordable. I'm wondering if you all are tracking that as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a hard question to answer directly. So I think that one of the things that we also wanted to show is that our free and reduced lunch data is not reliable anymore for being able to answer any of those questions. Because what we don't understand is we don't think that our poverty rates have decreased by 10%. We think that fewer people are submitting free and reduced lunch applications because they don't need to. So I think that that's, so that makes it hard to answer your question. I think there's a likelihood that some of the drop in, the number of students who are leaving to go to another district, some of that may be, I think it's a fair generalization or hypothesis to say that that could be tied to the lack of affordable housing.
Yeah, I just bring that up because I know that the city has started a program where they, I think they'll be trying to send families that were in the shelter to other districts or to other towns, and trying to make those towns more equipped for those families to be able to live there. So I'm wondering if maybe you can even utilize that as a resource to figure out who's leaving and what are some of the reasons to why they're leaving, because they're working on that.
I mean, it's very difficult for us to know the reasons why people leave because we don't have an exit survey of.
Yeah, sorry. I was just saying if you guys could work with that department at the city that is displacing folks to different towns to see if you can maybe draw a correlation to why, or if the school system can alleviate any issues around that.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just a suggestion.
No, and we are actually working with the city on that. I don't know, Dr. Valenzuela, do you want to say anything about that? So, I mean, we are also working particularly with Westbrook and with South Portland, where they've been heavily impacted by the fact that students are no longer being, families are no longer being sheltered in Portland, and instead are being sheltered primarily in South Portland and to some extent in Westbrook and now in Scarborough as well. But I don't know, we're working, so go ahead.
We're working with the different school districts where students are being placed. So the agreement is that where students sleep is that where they go to school.
Okay.
Even though they get support from Portland, and Portland GAs assign them in the hotels, motels in South Portland. And so South Portland has now a huge number of homeless students that they did not get before, because these were the families that were traditionally in the warming shelter in Portland. And we do not have that because of the pandemic. So we also have a regular meeting with our counterparts at the city. And they join us in our meetings, regular connection almost every day in terms of assignments of families who are arriving or are finding homes, permanent housing after being placed at the hotel for a few months. Yeah.
Thank you.
Go to Member Russell Bender and then back to Rep. Dayu.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Not sure, Superintendent, who could speak to this, but I was just struck by the note about especially third and fourth grade having the largest decline, and just wondered if, that is just random by chance, or if anyone has any guesses about why that specific group would be declining.
No, I don't have a specific, I don't have a hypothesis about that. We have contracted with Davis Demographics to do a longitudinal study. For those who remember, we had that 3 years ago now as part of the facilities and enrollment study. And obviously those numbers got completely turned upside down as a result of the pandemic. So we've asked them, and they're in the process of doing an in-depth sort of long-term projection. And, you know, so we will have some data on that in the coming months.
Okay, because yeah, definitely, it's not, you know, at a time of starting school or transitioning to the next, you know, to middle school, high school. So I just thought that was curious that, you know, age group.
I just wanted to offer some experience or around that. When I went to school, I came in around fourth grade, and my family migrated from Tennessee, and we were refugees. So like the structure around that could be different. You could be coming in the fall or in the winter. So that could also have a lot to do with like our immigrant students stepping in at certain times, or in fifth grade, sixth grade later, where those numbers wouldn't be accounted for in their earlier years. So just to give some insight on what that could look like.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi,
I was just curious about the huge drop of leaving the district between 2019 to 20 to current from homeschool and going to private. And I was just curious, of course, that could be the pandemic. Do you think that some of it is to do with
that? We think that is very much directly tied to the pandemic. I think that we had a very significant increase in the number of people who went to homeschool last year, and that is, you know, they now have come back.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? I'll ask one myself. Just curious, as part of this, not at the level of detail that you have here, which I really appreciate, if we have any access to data from other districts in Cumberland County or the other districts in the state that we compare ourselves to. Not that I need to see it tonight, but perhaps if we look at this again, I would appreciate to see those comparative trends.
We don't have the actual numbers, but, you know, as part of preparing for this, I did survey my colleagues in the county, and I think generally people have seen decreases. You know, so people saw significant decreases last year, and they did not get back to where they were. So in general, that is what, you know, I came away from the sort of informal survey of my colleagues.
Right. So in other words, at this point, we don't understand this as a uniquely Portland situation. Or
it's unlikely to be a uniquely Portland situation. I think that there may be, you know, more or less. I think, you know, obviously our sharp decrease in students coming from out of the country, which is sort of like accounts almost entirely for our drop. That is probably fairly unique to Portland, but some of these other you know, places that you see drops are probably are more commonly found in other districts. And, you know, in the case of South Portland, I know that's one of the districts that that actually did recover, and it's probably because of the large numbers that have been, you know, directed there.
Right.
That's one quick note on that is that we did want to look at that, but the latest data we have from the state on all the counties is 2018-19, and so for our purposes, it wouldn't reflect the trend.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. So I believe with this part of the agenda, there's not opportunity for the public to engage, correct, Superintendent? Okay, so just last call. Any other questions from the board? Member Youssef.
One quick question, Gabe. So when I looked at it here, the pre-K rate enrollment is increasing, and the kindergarten is decreasing. Isn't that supposed to be a correlation?
That's a great question, except that we've been expanding our pre-kindergarten programs. And so those numbers that you see are still significantly fewer than, you know, what we have in kindergarten or in any of our grades, because we're just building up that program. So I don't think that you should be looking at those as correlated, because we don't have the full capacity at pre-kindergarten to be able to take every student. And, you know, many families would not want to send their pre-kindergarten student to school. So
thank you so much.
I don't want to say many families, but some families may choose not to send their pre-kindergarten student to school.
Okay, I'm going to move us along. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you to everybody who contributed both to what we saw and what we heard tonight. We do not have any items under old business this evening, so we're going to move forward to new business. A reminder that there is no questions, discussion, public comment on these items, but there will be a workshop after our business meeting tonight on these issues. The issues are the first read to revise the buildings for our future governance structure, first read of revisions to board policy BCD, which is standing committees, special committees, and citizen advisory panels, and first read of proposed revisions to board committee structure. We'll now move to personnel. First is a consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed in the election of probationary teachers. Is there a motion? Thank you, Member Bondo. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Russell-Bender. Ms. Stoddard, would you like to speak to this motion?
No, unless there are any questions.
Yes. So on this, is there any questions from the board? No. Okay. And there's no public comment on personnel items. Any board discussion? Okay. By roll call vote, please indicate whether you are in favor of approving the personnel items listed. Election of probationary teachers. And Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Burke, Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better,
Yes.
Ms. Biliu,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Ms. Aswami,
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Yes.
Ms. Santiago,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously with the students voting with the majority. Next is a consideration and action to approve a contract extension for the superintendent. Is there a motion? Mr. Youssef, thank you. Is there a second? Thank you, Member Bondo. Mr. Superintendent or Ms. Stoddard, would you like to speak to the motion?
I would like to make a comment after the vote, but I don't have anything to say up front about it. I think the only thing that I will say about it is that we've been advised by council that this item does require the opportunity for public comment. So we will go, in a different direction from what we normally do with personnel items. But I do have a comment if you approve the motion.
Okay, very good. So is there any questions on the motion from the board? I see none. As the superintendent noted, we will accept public comment on this item, although we usually don't on personnel items. So if there is public comment, a reminder that you'll have 3 minutes. I will look on Zoom. Please use the raise your hand function if you would like to make a comment. I see none. So I'll move to board discussion. With closing public comment, is there any board discussion on this motion? Okay, I will say that I will enthusiastically support this item, and I think we're extremely lucky to have the superintendent. I'm proud of all that has happened in the district under his tenure, and I look forward to what comes next. So we'll move to roll call vote. By roll call vote, please indicate whether you are in favor of approving a contract extension for the superintendent. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Burke, Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better,
Yes.
Ms. Biliu,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Ms. Aswami,
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Yes.
Ms. Santiago,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes.
So the motion passes unanimously with students voting with the board.
Great.
Now, if you'd like to make comments.
Yes, I would. Thank you thank you very much for extending my contract. As I said earlier, I'm proud to have the opportunity to continue my work here in this great city and school district. The past 5.5 years have been amazing, and I look forward to continuing that work for the next 2.5 years. After this 2-year extension, I will have served the community for 8 years at that point, and I'm incredibly proud of the work that we've done together as an administration, board, and staff and community. Our work to create a more equitable and just school system is well underway. It's still in its infancy, and it's likely never be done. I look forward to continuing that work for the next 2 years and working with the board to develop a leadership transition plan. So thank you all for your trust and confidence in my leadership.
Thank you, Superintendent. With that, we're ready to adjourn. Before we do, I want to remind everyone that there's a workshop immediately after this business meeting to discuss how we're going to organize our committees with 6 elected members, as well as propose changes to the governance structure for the buildings for the future elementary school renovation projects. And the workshop will also cover pros and cons of the City Council calling a special election to fill the vacant school board seats. Finally, after the workshop, we will have an executive session to discuss our contract negotiations with the Ed Tech unit. To our new student representatives, our executive sessions are limited to board members elected by the voters only. And so you will not be able to join us for that. So with a consideration action to adjourn the business meeting, is there a motion? Member Youssef, it's a second by Member Bilo. All in favor with just a show of hands, please indicate. Okay, we're adjourned. It's 7:36.